for another Faith in KC episode. Sans sunglasses this time. Smart enough to be in the shade while I record this so I don't squint at you or have to wear sunglasses for the third time in a row. This morning I was working on a story about homicides in Kansas City. And I interviewed a pair of moms in two different locations that lost adult sons to homicide in the last few years. Heartbreaking, obviously, and something that I hope as you watch this is unfathomable to you, something that you can't ever imagine living through and haven't ever lived through. But that's kind of what got me thinking for this episode. I told them that I don't have any way of understanding what they've been through. And it shouldn't take something so awful as a homicide for us to be interested in hearing about where someone else is coming from. That's my opinion for the day. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation, especially this year, about trying to meet people where they are. And I've talked a lot about that in previous episodes of this with some of my previous guests. It's something that has become very important to me about understanding where someone's coming from before you think about your reaction to it, honestly. It's important to me in this series, and it's important to me and has become even more so this year, but it's important to me in life, period. I don't mind saying I'm a white guy, and I've, for the most part, got it pretty okay. And there are hardships and difficulties of life that I don't have any frame of reference for, in many cases, because I'm a white guy. That's not bad. It's not good. It's just, it's what these are the cards I was dealt. And because of that, I don't have an easy frame of reference for some other situations. Today, that meant I don't know what it's like to have a family member murdered. Both of the women that I interviewed brought up God and brought up faith. In different instances. One was about knowing that their lost loved one, their lost son is watching over them and is still a presence. One was about the future and possibly even afterlife future of the people who are accused of committing the crime that took their son. And I think both of those are pretty understandable. Today's episode is with a man that I had heard of many a time in my time in Kansas City, but never had a long conversation with him, Alvin Brooks. And it is a long conversation. I'll warn you now, this is the longest episode I've done so far, and that's part of the beauty of Faith in KC is it's not really edited. So you're going to hear some long conversations, and I hope you stick around for all of it. But I hope you will think about where someone else is when you encounter them today and how different someone else's circumstances are from yours before you try to inject yourself into a situation. That's a challenge for me on a regular basis, and I was reminded of it again today in some pretty awful circumstances. As always, reach out. You can email me at taylor.hemness@kshb.com, or you can reach out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, comment here, share this video if you would, and enjoy. Well, here for another edition of Faith in KC. I'm Taylor Hemness from 41 Action News, morning anchor from 41 Action News, and glad that you're joining us here on Facebook as we continue this series we've started this year. Really excited about today's episode because this is a man that I had intended to reach out to anyway, and then a previous guest on this segment, Bill Timaeus, also listed him as someone that I need to talk to. So I'm very glad to have Al Brooks here with me today. Mr. Brooks, thank you for your time. Thanks for taking some time to have a conversation with today. I appreciate it.
Quite welcome. And as I said, have friends like Bill Timaeus, hey, yeah, that's what can I say?
Yeah, he was quick to volunteer you. You were at the top of the
list. That's what good friends do to you. Thank you.
So, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I want to talk to you about this entire series is about faith and religion and spirituality, especially in 2020. And it's something that is a huge part of life for so many people, but we don't often cover it as a news organization. It's something that is probably one of the biggest things that people experience on a regular basis that we don't put a lot of time into putting on television. And that's what this series is about, is trying to address some of that time and effort and importance for people seriously, and to spend some time about it. Now, most of the other people I've spoken to we've talked primarily about COVID-19 and how that's affected our lives, but that's obviously not the only big thing happening this year. Al, you are my first person of color to interview on this segment, and I was very glad to have you say yes to do this, not just because you're a person of color, but because you've been in Kansas City for a long time. I want to ask you this. What's your reaction sitting here today as we get ready to start September to what this year has been like for racial tension, racial inequality, racial injustice, racial awareness? How do you feel about that massive subject sitting here 8 months into the year?
Not good at all. Not good at all, because I've lived, as I said, 88 years, thank God, and there have been some bumps, but in terms of health, but still here, and fairly sane mind. Sometimes there are those that would challenge that. Physically, okay, but I think that it's been challenging. It's not surprising though, based on the structure that we live in, and very few people are talking about structural racism in the system. The system was not set up. 1776, the Declaration of Independence, and 1787, the Constitution, and in 1791, the Bill of Rights. None of those documents dealt with the issue of slavery, except in the Constitution, when the South indicated, yes, we'll have 2 senators, but what about the House of Representatives? And that's based on population. We got more slaves than we've got whites. So they came up with the 3/5 clause, that slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person. And so none of those documents dealt with the issue of people of color, of slaves at that particular time. So it's my feeling that in a structural racist system, that there are 4 institutions that undergird that system: economics, political, social, and religious. And the religious institutions is as much a part of that as is the other 3, as I see it. And rarely do you hear a voice. And most people, I would suspect, of the 330 some million in this country, I would say that they are attached to some faith. But where is that faith as it relates to injustices? Where is that faith when it comes to situations that we see today? I don't hear voices speaking out. Now maybe there is a congregation, a particular community saying some things, but as a faith community as a whole, I'm not saying the church, because the church would mean more than likely talking about Christian, but there's also Jewish and also Buddhist and also Muslims, and all those faiths, it seems to me, would say to you, oh, we're for justice, we're for human and civil rights, and those kind of things. Well, where are those voices as a single voice dealing with the issue? And so I haven't heard that. That's disgusting to me and disturbing to me, because if I would believe, and I'm not a student of either of those great books, the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, the Bible of the Quran. I'm not a student, but I have read them just enough to think that only I think I'm an expert. Only I think, but enough. But I know that all of them talk about, to some degree, justice and relationships to a creator. And if that's the case, if that's not just a theory, but the case, then where are we as a faith body, as a religious body, as it relates to these kinds of injustices that are taking place? So, in my opinion, they undergird as much as political, economic, and social that structural racist system that was set into motion by those three documents that we call charters of freedom. You're going into the large federal buildings, and you see in that big glass locked case above, charters of freedom. It says that. Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with their creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Not necessarily so for those, my ancestors, who were slaves. The Constitution, to form a more perfect union, we the people, that did not deal with us. The first 10 articles, amendments, did not deal with that. And it's good to have people to come out and speak out, media to come out and do editorials. It's good for civil and human rights groups to move for the passage of legislation, to march peacefully, to follow Dr. King and Gandhi's principles of peaceful nonviolence. That's good, but that will not one iota change the S&Ls or NASDAQ or any of the rest of them. But the only way that I believe this, Taylor, the only way that you will have some systemic changes, structure changes, is to deal with the structure itself, which means that you've got to deal with those institutions that I've so articulated.
We've seen, of those four that you mentioned, I think it's fair to say we have seen a lot of political this year. We've seen a lot of social this year. I think we're beginning to see some economic, but of those two big, political and social, we've seen a lot, whether it be athletes taking a knee, or wearing Black Lives Matter someplace, or the way that it's brought up at the Republican and Democratic National Convention, the way that things are discussed in the wake of George Floyd, in the wake of Kenosha, anything else that's of the many things that have happened this year. On that topic of religious, though, how do you see those two not playing out this year? But you mentioned that you're not seeing the statements, the effort there to get out and say something, to do something. What do you see from all faiths as they respond to these horrific moments we've seen that are centered around race this year, whether it be George Floyd or who else? What have you seen from religion this year that has struck you?
Not enough in terms of those three faiths coming together. I would suggest that the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims of those three faiths decide, regardless of what their differences might be. This is bigger than either one of them, in a sense. Now, I realize that there may be people say, well, if you're not Christian, you're not this. If you're not Muslim, right, you're not this.
Right.
But would it not be good if those three faiths got together in this country? I'm not talking about worldwide. I'm talking just in this country, and said that means the Catholic, the Protestants, and all those who profess Christianity, and the different under the Jewish faith, the conservatives, and the Muslims, whatever one, to say, we're going to come out and say, regardless that we're opposed to this and we abhor racism in any form, bigotry in any form, a whole list of things that keep us from being our brother and our sister's keeper, keep us, that separate us. Now, the tragedy of all of that is that during these political kind of times that we're in now, there are segments of the religious community who've taken a political position, that perpetuates, in my belief, what's going on today.
Right.
So it's pretty hard for them to throw a rock and then hide their hand. You can't do it. But it would seem to me that that still does not keep others within that particular faith from saying, you don't have to denigrate them or say you don't listen to them. But if they came out and said these things as a group, now is that impossible? Nothing is impossible when it comes to faith in terms of coming together. I realize that there are more faith wars than any other wars, but this is the 21st century. This is not the days of old, and I think that there's a more of a progressive, if you will, and do not do it politics. That word progressive
Right.
thinking in the faith communities, plural, that could come out in a voice, denounce this, and don't worry about what's coming across in the plate on a Friday or Saturday or Sunday.
Right.
But did it because the Creator, we all created, I believe, equally. And the Torah and the Bible says that in the beginning God made heaven and earth, and then made us in His likeness.
Right.
And that if we believe that, then that means that there's no way in the world, and I add to that, not only likeness, but also there's another word that I use and it escapes me right now. But even if we believe that, it'll come to me sometime tomorrow. But even in likeness, that means that regardless of your faith, your gender, your sexuality, your color, whatever the status in life, that if I'm made in your likeness, that means we're connected to each other.
Right.
And that I've got to respect you as a fellow human being. Now, that doesn't mean I become colorblind, but that means that I'm color conscious, that I don't do things against you because you're colored, that I am religious conscious, that being a Christian, and I'm a Christian most of the time, and being a Christian, that there are certain things that I don't do or say to you because you're Muslim or Buddhist or Jewish, whatever. And I think if we ever move to that point, that we'll have a different country, because it starts, now, because I believe religion impacts upon those other three institutions that I mentioned to you.
Sure.
Impacts upon the most powerful of all of those four, though, in this free society and all is the bit of economics.
Sure.
It sets the stage for the other three. And so you've got, if you want to really make an impact upon where we are in this 21st century, you want to make an impact, and it's okay to talk, and this is kind of cliche, but you've also got to walk the walk, and you do that is make some structural changes. Again, it was good for Lincoln in 1863 Emancipation Proclamation, and then the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, the Reconstruction period. But you'll notice in all of that, there were constant attempts to keep blacks from being a part of that system. Even with that, the Reconstruction, about 11 years there, from 1865 to 1867. But after that, there were the black codes, and even 1857, the Dred Scott case that originated right here in the state of Missouri. And the Supreme Court said under Chief Justice Taney that no black man had rights that white men need to respect. And you move on to Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. The same thing, separate but equal. In the Supreme Court, May of 1954, separate equal. But what also is important is the Kerner Report after the riots of 1967. LBJ, President Johnson, appointed this Blue Ribbon Committee, bipartisan committee. And it was called the Kerner Report because Governor Kerner chaired it. And they came back, and somebody needs to read that. They need to read that because it says that white society created the ghetto and biased action maintains it.
Right.
And I'm saying, and then In August of 1968, August 15, 1968, here in Kansas City had its own homegrown riot.
Yep.
Began the 9th of April, 1968. Tuesday morning, 6 black men were killed. 6 black men were killed. 4 at 30th and Prospect, 1 at 19th and Vine, and 1, I think, at 37th and Florida. None were armed. None were threatening the police in no kind of way. The report, although I testified and differed with them, it was a blue ribbon report here. They never criticized the police. They never criticized the National Guard. They never criticized the state patrol, but they were killed by those entities. Even a 15-year-old kid, McKinney Jr. at 30th and Prospect. And so all I'm saying is that it said pretty much the same thing, but but kind of hopscotched along the way as the current report said. Now, it's my opinion this. If it's true, and it is true, that white America created the system, and white America has to be responsible for dismantling the system with the assistance of everybody else of color, whether they be of African ancestry or Hispanics, all the other people of color have to be a part of that dismantling. But the people of color don't have the power. You can have Oprahs and Michael Jordans who are billionaires and the rapper and all that. That won't mean a thing. You can pass all, don't mean a thing unless, Taylor, you began to dismantle the structural racist system. You will have these kind of flare-ups of injustice based on injustices as long as we're around. You'll have the ones in Minnesota, the ones in Oregon, and all around this country. There'll be flare-ups, and the police will be at the center of that. 2 weeks before the riot in Kansas City, I was one of 6 persons on the panel. And the 2 mayors, Mayor Joe McDowell in Kansas, Ike Davis, Kansas City, Missouri, Dowell, Kansas City, Kansas, the core chapter chair on Kansas. I was core chapter here in NAACP, Kansas. I was the 6th speaker, the 6th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th speaker, 6th speaker. And I upset the group because I said to them, the group is what the whole discussion was whether or not we could have a riot in our city, Kansas City, Kansas, Missouri. And everybody talked about the relationship between this black person, that black person, the relationship between the NAACP and the Urban League and all these kinds of things. SCLC it was not a part of that at the time, although it did come in a little late. And I said that we've got the same race situation in Kansas City, Kansas, that they have in other cities across this nation where they've had riots. And notable at that time was Newark, who had the great riot, which really spurred the current report, although there were other riots around. And when I said that, they booed me. They booed me. 2 weeks later, we had the riot.
Let me ask you this, and I want to remind people that we welcome your comments. Please keep them as, I know saying this on Facebook is sometimes a fool's errand, but please keep your comments as civil and as friendly as possible. We welcome your comments about what you think as you watch this, whenever that happens. I want to ask you this, Al. I've seen on Facebook and on social media, I have seen pictures of Jesus that say Black Lives Matter under them. And I've seen pictures of Jesus that say all lives matter under them. I want to ask you about the idea of kind of half and half hiding behind, to put it that way, and weaponizing a symbol of faith like Christ to get a point across, whether it be social media or someplace else, especially when it comes to those racial divides. I'm sure you see it too. There's a safety in numbers feel to it, isn't there?
Well, I think that's the case. I think people will do that. I think people will argue the point. Well, and I assume they do that with Jesus. I hope. Well, there's a up and down side of that. If there are people of faith that are doing that,
Mm-hmm.
or whether they're doing that just for the sake of trying to prove a point rather than doing it from a faith perspective.
Yeah.
That would be my concern. One other point also, if my theory has any position at all, everyone who, the question becomes, who are the beneficiaries of that structural racist system?
Right.
That's the question that needs to be asked. Who are the beneficiaries of that? Does that mean that you are racist because you're a beneficiary? No. It just means that you're a beneficiary of that system, which you ought to be as much concerned as anyone to dismantle that system so that there's equity across the board, socially, politically, economically. Now, when it comes to religion, that's a thing of choice. You don't have to be a Christian. You don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to be Muslim. You know, even if you're born in the Jewish faith in this lineage, you can still become a Christian or a Muslim if you're, whatever the case might be. But unless we address those kinds of things, and sometimes they say you don't mix religion with politics.
Right.
That's a bigger lie than Chicken Little told. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. But we stay just above that, so you won't lose your 501c3 status. But
Right.
It happens all the time, and we need to understand that and demand that. But I think I hate to use Jesus. And what would Jesus say today? I think Jesus would be very, very disturbed at what's going on. Not that it didn't take place during that day, but the question becomes, how do we make the changes, substantive changes, to where this nation becomes what we've been saying it is? That equal protection under the law applies to everybody. That we hold these truths to be self-evident that didn't exist in 1776 but exists in 2020. That to form a more perfect union will not begin in passing laws that'll help. I'm not discrediting that. I think that's great. But do we really get at the structural bit? On the social bit will take care of itself. On the faith bit that we started out with, what happens when we as people in the faith community, that's the broader faith community, come together? That was done right after 9/11. I remember hosting a number of meetings with Muslims and Christians and Jews. I remember being a speaker, a number of Reverend Vern Barnett and people in the Jewish community and others, Marvin Scheller with the Jewish Community Relations Bureau, American Jewish Committee, all hosted meetings to do it. That's great. But how do we change the system itself? Now, you got to do these other things. I'm not suggesting that you just back off and say, well, you can't do that. You can do it. We as human beings, the Creator has given us a kind of a sense far above any of the creations. And we can do it if we put our minds to do it. We talked about in 1950, when Sputnik went up, the Russians hit that up in 1957. Kennedy said we'll be on the moon by a certain date, and he committed ourselves, and we made it. We've never committed ourselves to eradicating racism and poverty in this nation, to my knowledge. Not during my 80 years. Now, I might have missed something along the way, but how about doing that? Eradicating racism and poverty.
Well, let me ask you this. Because that's a point you brought up a couple times now about different faith communities coming together if we want to accomplish something like this from a religious standpoint. I grew up in the Church of Christ and was raised as a Christian in a Christian family. But just within the church, in the Christian church, there are black churches and white churches. And is that almost an entirely different branch? I mean, whenever we're talking about different faiths coming together, this is a church that me and my brother believe the same thing, but he goes to a church with predominantly black congregation. I go to a church with predominantly white congregation. Is that even another wrinkle to that?
Well, but you see, why do we have black churches? Because first of all, we were denied, our ancestors were denied the right to even read and worship.
Yeah.
And took parts of the Bible to sustain racism And
Right.
to sustain slavery.
Right.
They gave us that bit about be submissive to your master. I'm paraphrasing, and
No,
so
you're
that's
right. Absolutely.
that's what I'm saying. And so what happened? What had to happen in the African American community is set up parallel organization, whether it's in the Greek organizations, the various sororities and fraternities, all those things, the black business and all those kind of things. They had to parallel organization because they were not accepted in white organizations.
Right.
And I'm not saying that we ought to have one church is black, one church that's multiracial. I think that the church that your brother belongs to, and I think that Adam Hamilton at Church of the Resurrection is doing a great job.
Yeah.
And large churches. I have a grandson who's in Atlanta who works for a large mega white church that recruited him, and he's working with black colleges to not necessarily to get them into that particular congregation, but at least bring the word to them and get whether they join from the black congregation or white congregation. And so I don't think the Creator intended for us to make a difference, as he says in the Quran and in the Bible and in Genesis but in the likeness of each other. But even so, I think we know right from wrong. We know right from wrong.
Right.
And we know, and if you don't have a sense and call yourself a person of faith, that discrimination based on anything is wrong, then I question your faith. If you tell me that, because you are Hispanic or origin or Latino or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist or a Christian or black, whatever, that there's not an equal role for you in that place called heaven, you've got some problems. I don't have a problem with it, but I think you'll be surprised in the day of judgment that you might get left out. You might be. That Peter may say, "Hey, no, I'm sorry, you go back down below." But this is real today. This is truly real today, and I always ask, particularly, I ask both black and white audiences, what do you tell your children?
Right.
About race, about religion, about ethnicity, about sexuality. What sexuality? I mean, in terms of gender. Mm-hmm. What are you telling them? What during this situation we're in now? What do you tell them? The pandemic that we're faced today, that people of color are the ones that are suffering the most, and it's based again. Go back to my theory. Is that why is it that we have health problems more than any other group? In spite of Brown versus Board of Education, integration with all deliberate speed, we still have segregation in school. I'm on the school board out here in Hickman Mills. 90% African American. Kansas City School District, that. Why is it that in 2020, we almost have as much segregation? I came out of a segregated system.
Yeah.
My first 2 years of college, from kindergarten to my end of my sophomore year, I never went to school with anybody other than black. But I got an education. I don't know how good it is sometimes. But then I went to the pretty much all white school, and I had problems there, not because I was stupid or dumb, but because of the color of my skin. I remember when in Kansas City as a Cub Scout, when they had the Scout roundup at the city's municipal auditorium, the black Cub Scouts and Scouts had to be on the outside of the arena, our whites on the inside. I remember when of the 10 high schools, there were 2 black high schools, R.T. Cole's Vocational and Lincoln. And I can remember that we didn't play football or basketball or track or nothing against those other white schools. So we had to go to Kansas City, Kansas and play at Wyandotte or Northeast, or go to St. Louis and play for Sean or Sumner, go to even get our team down to Muskogee, Oklahoma and play those. Because we did not cross the river. I mean, we did not play the white schools right around the corner from us. So I'm a product of that. seen it. Thank God that I've lived long enough, and as I say, maybe mentally sane enough to talk about it a little bit with some sense. But we're all in this together. I think it was the late Whitney Young who said in one of his speeches, "We might have come here on different ships. We're in the same boat now."
Yeah.
We are in the same boat now. So the later this stands.
Let me ask you that about, because that, I don't want to take up all your day. I know you and I could sit here and talk for hours about this topic.
Oh, I can go. I haven't gotten a second wind yet. Go ahead.
I don't want to take up your time, but I want to ask you this before.
Oh, this is important to me, at least.
I want to give you a hypothetical as we wrap up this conversation. You are a black man who's been in Kansas City for almost 90 years now. Been around the block, is fair to say.
A number of times.
Maybe all the blocks. You've been around all of them. If a person like me, a white man, young family, calls himself as a person of faith, comes to you, and a black man, young family, calls himself a person of faith, comes to you, and we both want to know, listen, Mr. Brooks, I'm looking around and it's ugly what I'm looking at right now. What can I do? Not what can my church do, not what can my faith do. What can I do? Is your answer different for me than it is for my black brother or not?
Oh, yes. Yes, it has to be. This would be my thoughts to my black brother, your black brother, my black brother, is that you have to continue to let it be known about the injustices that are occurring to you based on race. I don't care what kind of job you got, or this kind. And then I have to say to you, my white brother, yeah, and your black brother, is that I think you have a responsibility to educate yourself and your family first about race and racism. So you need to be saying to your children, like, see, it's different. See, you say something different to your kids than I would say to my kids. You won't have to say to your son, listen, if the police stop you now, be careful because you may get stopped. You know, they're gonna stop you. I would say that. I said that to my son. God bless his soul. He's passed on. And I say that to my grandkids. I host a Zoom every Wednesday. This will be the 16th Wednesday with black males from across, who started out in my family. Now it's expanded. There are about 40 that get on from east, west, north, south. And the whole purpose is to be saying to young folks, don't be a victim or perpetrator in this racist system like this. Don't you do this, this, and this. You do this. You know, respect yourself. To tie yourself to some faith. Be respectful at all times, even if other folks, all these kind of things. Don't use your race as an excuse for doing wrong or not excelling. This kind of thing we're talking about. And so I would say to you again that starting with your family, sitting down with the kids and educating them on as much as you can from a white perspective,
right,
as to what's going on, and to your black brother, who is also a person of faith, he's also saying to his black kids about what's going on, and how, and you have to learn if you already some of the root causes of that. You've got to do that, and that we have to, both of you have to be a part of the change. So you may have to raise that up in some hostile audiences. Your black brother won't. Yeah. Although there are big different opinions how to do some things. Some folks may say, man, we need to just have a vigilante also. The heck with Dr. King said in 50 down until he got killed in 68. You may, when you say that in your congregation, you have to tiptoe through the tulips. Because some folks are going to say, that's not our business.
Yeah.
Some folks are going to say, we don't want, the church doesn't want to get involved in stuff like that. Well, then what is the church all about?
Right.
So I think that would be my advice. That first of all, yourself, if you and I sense that you're of good conscience, then learn as much. Think about and I won't charge you for it. You won't get a bill, an invoice in the mail. Think about what I've said in terms of that structural racist system. Does it make sense that those three documents that are undergirded by those four institutions continue in 2020? What's the date? The 31st of June of August, are just as much in play today as they were when we separated from England. And there's constant attempts to deny people of color that right, politically. I don't get into politics of it today because we don't want to talk about that. I don't want to call any names, but I'll just say politically and let people's imagination run away with them. Do the separation that's going on, and I suggest you that a couple of things. Let me suggest to you and the viewers and the listeners. Read the Kerner report, 400 and some pages, but there are some shorter versions. The Kerner report, and secondly, read a speech that Frederick Douglass, a great orator, African American orator, and escaped free slave, wrote in 1852, called Independence Day and the Slave. Frederick Douglass. It will blow, and if you read it, I want you to give me a call after you read it. See what he says about that Independence Day and the Slaves, because there again, 1776.
Alvin, if somebody is watching this and you know, for the 5 people in Kansas City that don't know who you are, if somebody wants to reach out to you or send you an email and ask you a question, is there a way someone can do this that may see that?
Oh my God, why are you putting me in that position?
If you don't want to say,
let me tell you, I just finished my bill. Timaeus might have told you this. I just completed my memoir. It's 240,000 pages. And I'm pretty sure I have a publisher. It's my memoir of from my 14-year-old mother till just last year receiving the and thank them, the Greater Kansas City Chamber for being their Citizen of the Year. But I don't mind my email.
They can reach out to Ad Hoc, right? If they want to reach out to Ad Hoc.
No, I'm Ad Hoc is I turn it over to a younger person. It was something else I wanted to mention when you mentioned about the the email is fine. You know, I'm going to get that anyway. But it's something else I wanted to mention. It left me. That's what you get for being 88 and not as sharp. See, if I can remember what happened in some 40, 50.
Don't say not as sharp, because everything I've heard this afternoon does not indicate a lack of sharp. So.
Don't ask me what I had for breakfast. Dinner last night. Don't do that. This has been my pleasure, Taylor, talking to you. And but I urge you, get a chance to read the Kerner report, and also the local report. It's called the mayor's report on. I think civil disorder in Kansas City. It was issued the 15th of August, 1968, and I became the first Black director of director in city government, the 27th of May after the riot in '68. It's got so much that it's there. I wish we had a little more time, because this thing is sinister if anyone of just a good common sense and a person of faith look at some things and see the inequities that exist.
Right.
50 years ago, I used to stop by the Kansas City Call, the Black Weekly paper. Miss Lucille Bluford was the managing editor at the time. And I used to go by Monday, Tuesday, just chat with her. And this particular, have you got another couple of minutes?
It's your time right now, Al.
Okay, all right. And so this particular time I went by there and I talked to her about systemic racism. I didn't use the word structural.
Right.
Structural has more oomph to it seems to me. And I've developed that over the years. And when I walked in, she called me Brooksy. And she said, Brooksy, what are you here for? You got some news for me? You just want to talk? Some people just want to talk. And I talked to her about that systemic race and what I felt had to happen. I said it's good for NAACP and the Urban League and those groups, but Miss Blueford, unless we change the system by way of those institutions, and I didn't deal with the religious. I dealt with that recently because a friend of mine, I won't call his name and the institution with, said, Al, you got to add religious to that because that weaves itself through the other three, through the political, through the social, as well as the economic. And I added that as a fourth, and it made sense. And I said, I wanted to talk about it. So she said, listen, if you write a paper about that, I'll publish it as a guest writer, and I'll do an editorial, which I did. Now that was the what did I do with it here? I had it here somewhere. That was the February. That was this is where I've been writing and everything, so it's a mess around here. But this was February. And it was about, and our reason I talked about that because what we used to call Negro History Week. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, historian in 1926, started Negro History Week. In 1970, they started Black History Month. And this was in either early January, this was in late January that I was talking to her. I said, now next month, we're going to be talking about Black History Month. And that's when I began to talk about this whole systemic thing. And I said to her, I said, in 50 years, unless we change, we're going to be in the same situation, 100 years. And so I had to be digging out some stuff. Just after I got through my memoir, I just been going through the stuff in here. And I found this article. I said, you know how from February of 1970 to 2000 February, what many years is that?
I believe that's 50, right?
50 years, okay.
Yeah,
and the question becomes, how much have we changed that systemic racist system? Now I'm doing an addendum to that, and I'm going to send it out, dealing with just what I have articulated to you earlier about now structural, because I wasn't as specific. See, I was only 50 years ago. I was only 30 years old. Give me credit, you know. But 50 years late.
You're my age.
I'm sorry?
You were my age 50 years ago.
Yes. So 50, but now that I'm older and experienced more and have not seen systemic changes, structural changes, I can now reflect back on what I said 50 years ago and say, you were, and I might be the only one to believe it, although I know I'm not, that structurally there have been no changes. And there will not be any changes, Taylor, until white America says, I recognize what's keeping us from being as brotherly and sisterly as we should be.
Yeah.
And it's really based on race, and it's based on those institutions that keep us from doing that. It's okay for the Brookses and the Hemness to be friends, either because we want to be, not superficially. I'm Catholic most of the time, as I said, and Christian most of the time. But I get perturbed with the Pope often. And if I could tell him about it, I'd let him know. Now, Francis is pretty good fellow. But those other fellows, let me share. I said, let me mention this, and the two things I want to mention, I'm going to let you go. I said that an hour ago. There are two things I want to mention. In the 1960s, a African-American entrepreneur named J.D. Williams won the school district contract to bus kids. Okay?
Okay.
Because that day, the 9th of April, when after the rally, and I was the last speaker, one of the personalities at the Black radio station, Carter Broadcasting Group, AM/FM, John Frazier, got up and said that he had called Holy Name Catholic Church, where they had teen towns every Friday and Saturday, it was open that the kids could. After the march and the meeting, I'm skipping ahead. There was a march, and because the school district, first of all, refused to close the Kansas City School District. 3 black men was at the meeting that Monday night. Dr. Robert Wheeler, Dr. Robert Wheeler, and Dr. A. Campbell and myself. I left the police department and gone to the school district for these racist reasons. And so there were about 7 or 8 older white men. Hazlitt, the superintendent, was in D.C. at a conference. He was on the phone. Didn't have speakerphones at that kind of time and all that stuff, but he was on the phone. And the 3 blacks said, don't open the schools tomorrow. Kansas schools are closed. And therefore, if you open the schools, you're going to have bedlam, because what's going to happen, those kids are going to come around. And these kids are going to feel, well, you're not as concerned about the death of Dr. King as they are. No, we just built a new school on Indiana 47. We're going to call it Martin Luther King Junior High. And we're going to fly all the flags on those school properties at half-mast. That ain't good enough. Always to be. We had the riot.
Yeah.
Now, the morning of now, let me get back to Mr. J.D. Williams, who owned the Consolidated Cab Company, who had the first radio-controlled cabs, with a tower and everything, right there at 24th and Vine. I called him and said, Mr. Williams, we need some buses to get these kids out. But when he won the contract, no bus company in this metropolitan area would sell Mr. Williams a bus. He had to go outside of Chicago and buy the buses and have his cab drivers to drive him back to Kansas City. Then he found out, we're not mechanics. None of those companies, I don't remember the make of the bus, would work on the bus. So then he had to send people up to Chicago to learn how to work on the buses. Well, that's different from being certified down here with Ford or Chevy or General Motors. And when it came up again, those white companies that he beat out underbid him, and he lost his contract, and he had to belly up. The last thing, in 1963, the city of Kansas, Missouri passed a public accommodation ordinance. The tavern owners got together and garnered enough signatures. In this city, what you have to do, if you do a referendum, you get 10% of the last mayoral vote election, and you can put a referendum that stays that ordinance, and then have a public vote. They got that. There was a public vote. It narrowly passed. Freedom Incorporated was a black political organization, and the southwest part of the town, which was heavily Jewish at the time, as the one that caused that ordinance to pass. Fast forward, that was 1963, 64. Fast forward to 1968. The city of Kansas City, Missouri, in 1968, I think it was January, passed a housing ordinance in keeping with the federal and the state law. Those same tavern owners, with broader support, come up with a referendum to stay the passage of that ordinance, and it was supposed to be on a vote in April. If it hadn't been for the riot, those kids created an environment that created the riot. That was really the police did that. That would not, and so what happened then is the council then passed an emergency measure for the health, welfare, and safety of the city that nullified the referendum. So if the public accommodations ordinance referendum failed just narrowly, what do you think about housing?
Yeah.
That's more personal, because you don't have to, I don't have to eat with Hemness family. I can always go someplace else. But housing was different. What white realtors did, they'd come into your all-white block, and they'd buy a house and put the Brookses in that house, and then come to the Hemness and said, look who's moving into your neighborhood.
Black people moving in there.
Okay, and boy, look, and you know what they're gonna run you? They're gonna cause your property values to go down. They're gonna go to school with your kids. Tell me about structural racist system.
All over the place. Alvin Brooks, I can't thank you enough for your time, for your wisdom, for your honesty this afternoon. I could talk all day, and I could listen all day. I don't need to talk. I could just listen to you all day. But I really can't thank you enough for your time today. Thank you very, very much.
You're quite welcome. God bless you, and I hope we'll get a chance to talk again.
Same.
Tell everybody over Channel 41 that I said hello. I have good friends over there.
I'll do it.
All right. God bless. Take care of yourself. Peace.